global inflation had surged because of wars and supply chain disruptions.
What Mr. Wong doesn't say is that it was his party that raised prices on a whole host of items. And let's start with water. The PAP raised water rates twice, once in 2024 and another in April this year, a total of an 18% increase. It had already increased water prices by 30% in 2018, which was before the COVID pandemic. Global inflation? Really? And then in 2021, the PAP hiked petrol duty by 23%. Bus and MRT fares went up by 6% last December. Transport prices have increased every year for the last 5 years except in 2020 during the pandemic. Electricity and gas rates, with a few exceptions, have also been climbing through the years. Singapore Power, a company owned by the government, has raked in profits in the billions. Compulsory MediShield Life premiums will increase by up to 35% starting next month. PAP town councils all raised the service and conservancy charges in 2023 and then again in 2024. The NEA raised rubbish collection fees in 2017, 2022 and 2024. Again, what has the global inflation got to do with this? NTU, NUS and SMU all increased their dormitory fees by 7 to 12%. Now, on top of all these price increases, the PAP increased the GST to 9%. This means that the increased GST is added on top of all the price hikes that I just mentioned. If it is true, as Mr. Wong says, that the cost of living skyrocketed because of global factors, then why did the PAP make the situation worse by raising the GST and other fees and prices? If he really knew that the cost of living is our biggest concern, if he truly cared about Singaporeans, why did he pile on all these price increases? Or is he now doing damage control because the GE is coming?
Remember, at the beginning of this decade, we were still in the thick of battle, fighting COVID-19. It was a time of great uncertainty. That's why when the economy showed signs of stabilizing, we decided to proceed with the GST increase.
Also remember, the PAP made the decision to hike the GST in 2018, way before the outbreak of COVID-19. In the 2020 GE, the SDP knew that the pandemic would cause Singaporeans severe difficulties as far as living expenses were concerned. We therefore called for the GST to be suspended. But the PAP ignored the people's pain and went ahead to increase the GST in 2023 and 2024. Mr. Wong's spinning is quite dizzying and frankly making us all rather nauseous.
In this budget, we've provided additional measures to further ease cost pressures.
The problem is that these cost pressures have been going on for decades. Now, the government has had to continually give out financial assistance since 20 years ago because it kept increasing the cost of living beyond what the people could afford. In 2004, it implemented the Workfare Income Supplement to aid the insufficient wages of lower income workers. In 2008, the government gave growth dividend payouts to help them cope with the increased cost of living. In 2014, it was the Pioneer Generation package intended to reduce cost of living pressures, especially healthcare costs for the older generation. In 2015, the PAP gave out GST vouchers to help Singaporean households with their living expenses. Then there was a Silver Support Scheme introduced in 2016 to provide cash support to lower income elderly citizens. In 2018, former PM Lee Hsien Loong acknowledged that the Merdeka Generation package was given because the elderly were looking at their CPF savings and Medisave accounts, worried about having enough for their medical needs as they grow older. In 2023, Mr. Lee announced the Majula package, which according to an analyst is aimed at younger seniors who need help amid rising costs of living and anxieties about retirement adequacy. Now, as you can see, the PAP has been giving out vouchers and financial assistance in the last 2 decades to help Singaporeans cope with the cost of living that it keeps increasing. The question is why? Why do the people have to depend on handouts from the PAP for decades just to cope. We are now all just hentak kaki, treading water. Why is it so hard for Mr. Wong to see that Singaporeans want to thrive, not just survive?
And we do everything we can to keep our Singapore miracle going generation after generation.
Is this Singapore miracle the same one where Dr. Tan See Leng's interview was headlined by Channel News Asia that Singapore needs foreigners to survive? Why, after 60 years of PAP rule, have we come to a state where Singapore cannot survive without foreigners? What kind of miracle is that? And one would have thought that Singaporeans alone would be able to keep our country alive. Yes, we would do better with foreigners, and we welcome them. But we must be able to survive. We have to, without foreigners.
This is who we are as Singaporeans. We look out for one another.
Really? A study in 2019 found that there were around 1,000 homeless people in Singapore. For many of them, homelessness was often chronic, lasting 6 years or more. A quarter of those interviewed had eaten just one meal a day or none at all. And unemployment, irregular work, and low wages were reasons for their homelessness. By 2023, this number had remained constant, with more moving into transitional shelters. In 2021, the government revealed that 8 in 10 Singaporean workers who are 35 years old and above still earn wages below $1,300 per month through part-time or full-time employment. A quarter of Singaporeans say that they feel stressed to the point where they cannot cope or deal with things. Half reported feeling depressed to the point that they feel hopeless almost every day for weeks at a time. Many say that the cost of living is the source of their stress and mental health problems. Nearly 50% say that they will never be able to achieve financial freedom. Now contrast this with ministers who live in grand, good class bungalows. One sold his GCB for $50 million and another for $88 million. Now, let that sink in for a moment, my friends. When elections are around the corner, Mr. Wong now says,
We look out for one another.
the sheer brazenness and audacity is really something to behold. As the Cantonese say, 真係唔怕醜. Mr. Wong's post-budget video is but the latest example of how the PAP has been using clever rhetoric to manipulate Singaporeans, exploiting us rather than genuinely serving us. But there comes a time when people wise up and see through the facade. That time is now.